Hi, I'm Michelle Olivier, and you're listening to Hey, I Want Your Job, the podcast that looks at amazing jobs and what it takes to get them. Welcome to Hey, I Want Your Job. And I wish I had Shannon's job. I do. I have none of the skills required, let me be clear. But gosh, her job just seems like it would make my heart glad all the time. Shannon, what's your job title?
I call myself a compassionate human because I think that's the most appropriate description. But
Okay.
most people would call me a photographer.
And why is your favor of photography make you a compassionate human and give me the warm fuzzies?
You are probably getting the warm fuzzies about the animals because I photograph mostly domestic animals, and they are typically in the end of life. So they're getting ready to die, and people are reflecting on how great their lives together have been and how hard it's going to be. But I also photograph a lot of animals that have disabilities. So the long term medical treatment, and it's it requires a lot of heart space to do. So it's difficult, and it's the best thing ever.
How did you get to this place? Like, talk me through how this happened.
Okay,
This is
well,
crazy.
on the other side of things, the other type of photography that I do that usually doesn't give people the warm fuzzies is funerals and hospice. I do that for people, and it all started when I was pregnant. This is in 2013. I had been a photographer for 4 years, I think. I started my first business 4 years prior to that. And there was stuff happening in my life. I was pregnant, and there were a lot of complications with the pregnancy. And I started to see how invisible people that were grieving were. Even if they were grieving in anticipation, they had a diagnosis of some kind, and they knew that this thing is going to happen either to themselves or someone that they love. And that a lot of them wanted to talk about that and process it with somebody, and the people in their lives that they had loved and trusted for a long time didn't have the skills to do that. And so they would turn away from them. And it's not because they wished them any harm at all. It's just because they didn't know what to do. So they thought, well, I'm going to do nothing because I think that will be the least offensive. And I was in that position, and I was just feeling people abandoning me. And it was at that time that I started picking up my camera to deal with difficult, complicated emotions. I was doing it for myself mostly, but also because I wanted to leave like a diary for someone if anything happened to me, for my husband primarily. And it grew because people saw in the hospital what I was doing, and they said, "Could you come do this for my family?" And I would say, "Sure." And as far as how it got to animals, that's where I most like being. And I think that in doing this kind of work with animal family members, people open themselves up more to being vulnerable and to talking about the things that are hard to talk about. And then they send me messages later about, my dad has this diagnosis, and because of the experiences that I've had with you, or because I've read what you've written, I've been able to change how I'm approaching this, and it's helping all of us. And it's stuff like that it, they're not it's not about the photography at all. It's about showing up for people at a time when they feel like people aren't showing up.
That cuts me to the quick. My dad died of cancer. He died 6 days before my son was born.
Oh.
And um and so my dad died on a Sunday, and I checked into the hospital to be induced on the Tuesday, and they tried for a week to get that little bastard out of me. And so it was 6 days after my dad died that we finally had the C-section and he came into this world. But my dad, it was very sudden. So,
Mhm.
he, uh, he and my mom had been in France shopping for where they're gonna retire, etcetera, and they came back and life was normal, and it was one morning he was in a meeting and the guy next to him was like, "I don't wanna be weird, but did you know your eyes are yellow and that seems not great?" And he was like, "That's very weird." Doctor's appointment, um, they found a mass in his liver, did a biopsy, and a week from that day, he never walked again, and 4 months later, he was gone. And it was just lightning fast.
Yeah.
And my father was a force of nature, and so all of this happened in California. He, determined that he was born in Texas, and by God, he was gonna die in Texas. So we got ambulance, airplanes, and etcetera to move him from California to Texas, expense be damned. And sure enough, that's exactly what he did, but it was hard, and I think that one of the things that was hardest was as short as it didn't feel short at the time.
Mhm.
It was months, and you can't, as an adult human, and especially as a very heavily pregnant woman, um, you can't spend all day, every day soaking in every second with that
Yeah.
person. Can't just go sit at the hospital, and he wouldn't have wanted it. He was definitely one of those people that, he didn't want our lingering memories of him to be of him at the hospital, and so we would be summoned. He would send a text message or call and be like, "You're gonna come here now, and we're gonna have this conversation." And I was like, "All right." And then other than that, when he was done, he told you to GTFO. Like, he was done, go. I don't want, to be guy to be what you remember. And like he was that was him. And I remember at the time, like, feeling overwhelmed and upset and crying that, like, I don't have time, like, with the belly and the things, like, I just
Mm.
didn't, and I don't know what to do. And I have had moments where I've beaten myself up that I robbed myself of any moment
Yeah.
with him. And so I can completely appreciate why what you do would mean everything to somebody.
It's very it's a chilling feeling to experience something like this in your own life, and you can see it happen in someone else's life and think, "Oh, well, I know what I would be doing."
No, you don't.
Which is where a lot of the judgment comes in when people do talk to grievers,
Yeah.
that there's, "Oh, well, you really should be doing this, because if it were me, I would totally be doing that and everything would be better." And yet, when you're in the circumstance, even if you've prepared for it, you can prepare logistically. You cannot prepare emotionally. It is not possible. You do not know all of the things that are going to come your way, and how you feel changes so much throughout the day. And it to have people turn away from that and to feel invisible and disregarded is a horrible feeling at a time when people really need support. And I have felt that. So, really, the reason why I do this is because I don't want anybody to feel that way if I'm close enough to be there with them. And the photographs, one of the comments that I get a lot is, "Oh, that's, especially with the funeral photography side of things, why would you want to do that? It's like gross and weird and inappropriate and morbid." Because they think that what I'm doing is standing over an open casket and photographing a dead body, and that's it. Maybe some flowers thrown in, but it's people hugging and laughing and telling stories and crying until they almost pee in their pants. and seeing people that they haven't seen in a really long time. And when it comes to the animal side of things, it's people, because I don't ask people to sit and pose in a certain way and then I photograph them. I ask them questions. The whole thing is very conversational. So I had a session over the weekend and I said, what's the most trouble she's ever gotten into? The dog's name was Lola. So of course, the heads go back, they start laughing, they start crying. And they've been crying the whole time, but they've been crying sad tears and now they're crying happy tears. And it's this family of 4 adults, 2 parents and 2 sisters, and they're taking turns telling the story line by line of the time that Lola did this and the time that Lola did that. And that's what it's about. It's about, not that I want to put a silver lining on it because I'm not a silver lining person, but also making the time to celebrate the life that you've shared. And even though the last days or weeks may be really difficult and uncomfortable, there was all of that that came before.
I love that. And again, to make it all about me. I really wish in retrospect we had had somebody like you for my dad's celebration. He did not want a funeral.
Mhm.
He was very clear. He did not want a bunch of misery guts sitting around feeling sorry for themselves. He wanted everybody to get together and tell stories about Jerry.
Yeah.
And we did. We went to his one of his favorite watering holes. We all had way too many margaritas. He was enough of a legend that when I called the restaurant and I was like, "Hey, my dad has bought a lot of tequila there and like we'd like to come," and they're like, "Oh my God, your dad is Jerry Olivier? Jerry died?" We got it, and they, like,
Oh,
closed the upstairs bar, and everybody came, and they bought, like, these huge flowers, and, I, of course, had my newborn son, and so I'm, like, walking around with the kid on my boob, talking and, like, talking about my dad, and, what I always say about my dad is that he's my favorite asshole, and that's kind of, like, for people who liked my dad, that everybody's like, "Yeah, that tracks for Jerry," right? Um, he was not a nice man. Um, but it was great, and it's exactly what you're talking about, right? Like, we're
yeah.
all, like, having a margarita and telling stories about one time Jerry did this asinine thing, or Jerry did this other thing that was really great, or what have you, and there was so much laughter, and there was so much connection, and, yeah, there were also tears and all of that, and I so wish, in retrospect, that I had photos of all of those
Yeah.
things because it was such a blur between being postpartum and, you know, grieving my dad and everything else. Like it was just a blur. And so having something to freeze those memories and let them come back about the positive stuff would be amazing. So I can hear why people might at the first blush think it was morbid, but I
Mhm.
I agree with you. I don't think it is at all. I think I
No.
think it's so joyous.
And it's a marvelous tool for grieving because in this story about your dad and people coming together to honor him and to tell stories about him and then to realize that each of them knew a different version of him because we're all like that.
Absolutely.
Every being on the planet is like that. um, it, it really highlights that grief is a community health issue, right? And we live in a very independent, staunchly individualistic society. And
Yeah.
it's hard to have conversations about things that we don't have the skills to have conversations about. And photography is a really nice way to try to approach some of those. So if you go to a workshop on difficult conversations or uncomfortable conversations or whatever it's called, there's a lot of stuff that's really hard to do. You go through the class and you're nodding your head and you think, oh, this is such a great idea. Yes, 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 I can see how this would work. And then it comes time to do it and freeze.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
so hard to do. It is much easier to pull out your phone or to pull out an album or to pull out prints or to send somebody a link to a gallery and not have to say anything and still be able to have a conversation. This is something that has happened in my life that is important to me. I trust you and I want to share it with you. And that's really all that needs to be said. And if something else grows from that that involves words, that's marvelous. And if nothing else grows from that, that's good too, because there's still that container, that little space for two people to come together and to share an experience and a set of feelings, knowing that they might be really different from each other, but that's okay.
I so agree. I had a friend of mine died kind of out of the blue. She had a brain tumor she didn't know about and just was gone. And she was sassy and vibrant and weird as fuck and like everything that I love about people, right? And she was complicated and not everybody's cup of tea.
Mhm.
And there's lots of reasons that we were good friends. And her sister and mom reached out to me for some photos of the two of us, and they put them together. um, and there's like these things online now that do like a montage of your life that people can go and like leave messages. And so I went and I did that. And I remember I was like, what in the hell music is this? Like, what? And I reached out and I'm like, what are you playing in this montage? And like, oh, well, we really thought she would like that. I'm like, bitches, you understand that she and I used to go to concerts together and were drinking buddies. Like, I can 1000% tell you that none of this shit was on her playlist. Like, I can tell you exactly. And so they were like, "Oh, okay, well, great." And so we put together a different playlist of the stuff that was her. And then all
Mhm.
of a sudden I watched the exact same images that they had done, but now listening to it with a song that would have been her. And I just like I laughed and I cried and just like sat, and it just made it visceral, and it made it much more of like a real and cathartic experience. And um I think that what you're saying is exactly true, that like there's not a way I could have expressed why I would miss her or what our friendship was that was better than this montage of her with her kids and her being weird. And like this is one where she like had half her head shaved, and here's one where she had the other half shaved, and this is like all of the different like things that were her all in one place with like music that she would have absolutely been dancing to the whole time. And I just yeah, so yes, I totally and completely feel what you're saying, and I think we need more of that. I think that there's
Mhm.
a lot of there's so much grief, and especially these last few years, we're grieving so many things, and we have no idea how to do it, and we
Right.
don't know how to talk about it. I'm a freaking certified bereavement counselor, Shannon, and I don't have the words half the time, right? And so,
Mhm.
I think that everybody has that, and we just when we don't know what to say, we just say nothing,
Yep.
and then people feel alone.
That's very true.
And I think that what you do gives somebody, like you said, something to say, even if it's a picture, even if it's a song.
It's a start. And the starting is the hard part. It's, once many of us get started, we can start to build some momentum. And then things get a little bit easier, pushing a rock up the hill. But when you stop and then try to start again, or you're starting for the first time, it's really, really difficult. And there's just, I, I think another thing of it is that in the end of life, and it doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is, if it's human human or if it's human other species, that we have ingrained in our memories how it ended, how how the other's life ended, because the relationship doesn't end, the relationship continues, we get to keep that, and that's where grief comes from. But the death the death, we stay with that. And what I'm hoping to do for people is to invite them to consider that there's a lot more to the end of life than the death of life, and that it's in the end of life that things become enormously clear. That all of the sudden, any sort of indecision that we've had about certain things goes away, and it's very easy to decide, oh, yes, this is what's meaningful to me. This is where I'm going to invest my time. These are the things that I want to say. And that is really worth celebrating. It's like uh, at the end of the hero's journey where there's this big realization and you are vanquishing whatever metaphorical dragon there is. And then you have that moment that's almost transcendent, and you think, okay, there's really hard stuff going on, and there's still going to be hard stuff going on. And yet I feel like I have answers that I didn't have before. And it's not that we get a download of answers. I think it's just that we become, when we are faced with a time limitation, when we're looking at mortality, we realize, oh, yeah, things are limited. I don't have all of the time that I want. I need to do stuff now. If it's important to me, how can I figure out how to do this? And if there's 12 things that are important to me, how do I figure out where to start? And it just becomes so much easier when there is a bit of that time squeeze, as uncomfortable as it is, that it really does encourage us to be more direct, to express ourselves with more sincerity, but also more authority. Like, yes, this is really how I feel, and no, you're not going to gaslight me. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I like seeing how people transform into more versions of themselves. And that doesn't happen for everybody, of course. It doesn't happen every time. But there is a certain amount of courage that is required to go through this process with someone. And to see that come out and roar in my face is incredible. And to be able to see it on film and then to reflect that back to the person and say, look at you, fierce being you. Look at how fiercely you are loving in this moment. It is gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Did you ever think that you had this in you?
I I love that. But at the same time, grief takes a toll, right? So
Yes.
as I said, like I am a certified bereavement counselor and I did some of that. And I don't now because it's heavy. Like
Mhm.
people who do that for years and years, I don't know how. How do you keep you safe? How do you balance your emotional load so that you get to keep being Shannon and have good days and bad days and sit in traffic like the rest of us and go to dinner with friends and laugh and, stub your toe and that everything doesn't have that emotional weight of all of everybody else's grief, etc., weighing on you.
I take time after every session that I do to just sit and feel things. And in the early days, when I started doing this, I thought, oh, that's great. I can do a session in the morning and a session in the afternoon. I can be with two families on the same day. I could probably do four families over a weekend and then a couple during the week. That'll be fabulous. And no, I could not, because if I did a session in the morning, I was still thinking, and I moved on to the afternoon, I was still thinking about the family from the morning. And it wasn't enough time for me to process stuff. So I wasn't able to really be there and be connected with the family in the afternoon. And I felt horrible about that.
Sure.
I apologize to everybody that was. I mean, nobody ever came to me and said, "You seem really emotionally disconnected today, Shannon. What's up?" Um, but having the time after every session to just feel what I feel about it. And then knowing that it's not my circumstance, and I can have all of the empathy and the compassion in the world. And that doesn't mean that I need to carry everything around with me all of the time. And so I have a couple of little rituals that I do that help me remind myself that this work needs to have a series of containers. And it's not that I want to, what is the word? I don't want to separate myself from the work. I think it's essential that I not separate myself from the work. And in hospitals, I've had doctors and nurses tell me that I need to get my stuff together because the family doesn't want to see me cry. Because almost every session, I'm on the periphery somewhere, hugging a wall and looking out to see what's happening. And I'm crying because I can't not. And I've told them,
Sure.
well, the day that I'm not feeling this is the day that I need to stop, because this is about being emotional. So you carry on with however it is that you want to do things, and I'm going to do things however I want to do them. But making sure that I have those rituals so that I can put things into containers and I can hold them there for as long as I need to. And then when I am ready to give the photos to the family, that I have everything in that container with their stuff. And I just pick it up and I give it back.
I want to stop and talk about that what you just said about the doctors and nurses component, because I think that that's a really interesting comment on
Mm.
how we think about medicine, that we have made medicine this hard and cold science, and it is not about the community, and it's not about the whole person. And we know, like, there's been a lot of articles and everything about, like, we have a crisis of empathy in our medical community, right? That doctors are
Yes.
struggling to care. And that the result is that we know that doctors who have a lower ability to empathize and carry emotional burden from their patients have patients who report worse patient experience, higher levels of pain, etc. So, like, there's a clear disconnect, and it's hurting us when you have those. I guess, first of all, I'd like for you to just kind of talk about what you've seen on front lines around that, but then also talk a little bit about, you know, have you ever moved the needle for a nurse or a doctor
Hmm.
by saying that and have them own that and have their own emotional moment as well? And what does that look and feel like?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a big problem, and it's for me. It's sometimes hard to come into those spaces where I know that there's going to be a lot happening medically. For the human side of things, the subjects that I photograph, the people at the center of the family at that time are kids. I do work with older adults, but mostly it's kids, sick kids that have been in the hospital for a good part of their lives. And I think that is a different kind of conundrum for healthcare workers, because a lot of them have kids, because a lot of them are especially moved by someone young who has not had there. We throw away elders. We say, oh, well,
They
he
had a
had
good
a really
life.
great life. Yeah. He lived for 88 years. That's great. With a 4-year-old, it feels different. No matter what, no matter who you are, it feels different. And I do I see people steeling themselves before they go into the room. Like they're putting on all of their protective devices, emotionally protective devices. And this reminds me of Brene Brown and how she says that, the heavier your armor is, the harder it is for you to really, you can't be with somebody because you're so well fortified that you can't be vulnerable and you have to be vulnerable to be able to connect. And I watched them do that and walk into the room. There's the hand on the door and the big exhale, and they go in. And then they put on their face and they do what they need to do. And they're doing it from their perspective. They're doing it out of their own version of compassion, because for them, that means being helpful. For them, that means having the answers. For them, that means doing everything they can and giving the information, which is great. And parents and siblings and grandparents and aunts and uncles and anybody else involved, they also need somebody to resonate with, because it's hard to talk to someone about your child who you can tell has steeled before coming into the room. It's very, very difficult. And then I'm speaking as a parent that's been in this situation myself, because my little guy is in the hospital quite a lot, and sometimes critically. And to have a conversation with somebody that has switched off an emotional response,
Yeah.
I can only speak for myself here, but I feel like the sense of shame that grows in me because I'm emotional about it, because I'm having trouble expressing myself in a logical way, because I need to get this doctor's attention. I need to get this nurse's attention. I need to get this therapist's attention. And I don't want to be dismissed as being histrionic, right? But for me, this is my whole life. My job in life is to make sure that his life, that he's prepared for it, and that his life is as good as I can provide while he's in my care. For them, it's another day. And I know that jobs are hard. And I know that they have a lot of other stuff going on, and there's somebody down the hall that has 3 times more things happening. I totally get that. And I know that it's hard to balance all of that. I also think that they need to learn how to do it, because they're just based on clinical outcomes. I'm betting that their clinical outcomes would improve.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that touches on, we have such a tendency to dismiss anybody, but especially women who are emotional.
Mhm.
If you're crying, if your voice is not at a, inside voice business tone, then obviously you have nothing to contribute, right? And
Right.
that's just not human. That's not real. That's not normal. And then that's before we talk about the toxic masculinity standards that say that men just aren't even allowed to cry. They're not allowed to have those feelings. They just have to stand there and be stoic, right?
Yeah.
Like the famous line from Steel Magnolias. It's like men are supposed to be made out of steel or something, but it's the women that have to go and do it. Like that type of thing all impacts it, and it needs to be broken down, because ultimately, you know, we are emotional, we are humans, and when we try to deny that part of ourselves, even to have the doctor conversation, it just it it doesn't it I think it just sets us up for some of the mental health issues we're having. It sets us up for not being able to process it. And I think that emotive response is part of what needs treatment, is
Mhm.
part of what needs to be included. I remember um, when I was in hospital with my second, we joke that he was a super pooper. He pooped 13 times in the first 24 hours of life.
Oh,
Girl, he was
that's got to
out
be a
of the
record.
They had never seen anything like it. He pooped 4 times before we got out of the birthing room. Like, he was just like, "I'm done. It's out." It was ridiculous. So you can't poop that many times. Like, you're a mom, so the first couple of days, they're super like every ounce of weight, right, is like a
Yeah.
big deal one way or the other. And they were kept coming at me like, "He's not gaining enough. He's losing too much." I'm like, "He's pooped 14 times. You go poop 14 times and come back and tell me what your body weight looks like."
Yep.
Um, but nobody would hear that. And I had a C-section, so I'm postpartum
Mm.
and I'm like been cut in half and like nobody's in a good mood, right? And here I am trying to he and I are figuring out feeding and everything else. And it's like every time they were weighing him like every couple of hours and being like, he's not, it's not enough, it's not enough, it's not enough. And I'm like, I got hysterical and I finally told them to go F themselves without saying F. I just literally said, "You just get the fuck out of my room." And I remember very clearly that some woman came in and she did exactly that whole like, "I'm gonna go deal with the difficult patient breathing
Hmm.
thing." And she came in with her "I'm placating you now" voice.
Yeah.
And I said, "I'm just gonna make you stop right there. The tone and the voice that you're using are escalating this situation. I don't need to be placated. I don't need to be spoken to like I'm a child. I'm an educated and intelligent woman. I just disagree with you on this. So now let me tell you what we're going to do, and then you're going to turn around and walk back out." And like her face at being called on her armor was not great.
Hmm.
We did not have a good relationship, she and I, going forward, but I think that's kind of to your point, right? Is that we get so comfortable in that armor that we forget that we think it's invisible and it's not,
Right. Yes, exactly that.
and we forget that the thicker our armor, the other side can see it, and the fact that and they came in here with armor too. And if they are in this emotional and raw place where their armor has been stripped, you need to honor that. And you need to recognize that it's not because they're a bad person or a broken person or a less worthy person. It's because shit is real and that needs to be part of
Yes.
your response and part of how you deal with it. And how do you see have you seen anything that is an effective way that people have handled it? I obviously handled it poorly, Shannon. Shouting profanities at a doctor is not a recommended strategy. Um, have you seen
Maybe you
anything
should
that
teach a class.
how to shout profanities at a doctor?
I might sign up for that because advocacy is hard. It is really hard to feel like you're not being listened to.
Mhm.
When you know, as a parent, you have that parent sense that, see, there's something that you're missing. There's something that you're missing. You've been missing it for days because all the stuff that you've tried isn't working. I think it's this thing. No, no, no. Couldn't be that.
What do
Yeah.
you know, simple mortal? You have no medical degree.
Um, I I've heard about some medical schools that are now offering or requiring, I should say, classes in empathy and teaching more about the emotional side of practicing medicine. It's necessary. And I think that the entire education process for physicians, especially nursing school, is different. Medical school, it's like they're trying to beat their students and their residents and their interns into a bloody pulp to see if they can make it. And then if they make it to the end of that, okay, well, then you're clear. It's like the ultimate hazing.
It is. It's like a gauntlet of pain that they go through. And I have heard people within those areas say that part of it is to break your ability to empathize, that they
Yeah,
inundate you so that you can't anymore. And I'm just like, that is sick at so many levels.
it's not, I mean, not being an expert on the human body, it seems like that cannot be healthy because we have evolved to have emotions. We have evolved to have stress responses, right? So it seems to me that using those and finding ways to work within them instead of against them would be very useful. And I say this as a person who was a champion level stuffer of emotions for a very long time. It wasn't until that 2013 period that a lot of stuff started happening and I realized, oh, I just opened this closet door of all of the things that I promised that I would deal with when it was a better time. And they all fell out on my face and suffocated me. And I had to fight my way back to the top. So now I know that I can't put things in that closet unless I really do mean that I'm going to come back. And I really mean that I'm going to come back and be with how that feels. But we have people that are responsible for caring for other people that are not cared for themselves. They're not cared for by their colleagues. They're not cared for by their mentors. They're not cared for by themselves. And it's just, no wonder because the work is so difficult. It's brutal. And we have asked them to do the work. We've expected them to do the work without a full set of tools. I think that if we had people with more, I don't want to say resilience because I don't like where people are using that word lately, but more emotional intelligence and awareness of how they're feeling, that they would be able to move into a situation and be with a family that is deciding to withdraw life support and have a conversation about that that feels meaningful, that the family is going to remember for a long time, and then move out of that room and take a moment and think, yes, that's really hard. I'm feeling this and this and this. I'm going to give myself 10 minutes. And now I know that we don't have a system that's set up like that, but
We probably should.
it would, I think that it would better care for more people. And maybe it would reduce some of the urgency of the things that people are asking for care for, because perhaps we would have better long term care, long term health for people, and there wouldn't be as many urgent, acute kinds of things.
I so agree. And I think I kind of hearing you, I think back to, when you work in mental health, um, there's a requirement for what they call supervision, but it's really your own counseling, right? Like if you're going to be, especially if you're going to do something like bereavement counseling or
Hmm.
crisis counseling or something like that, like you also have to have a therapist of your own that you go to so that you're not carrying it around and they help you process all of that. It is insane to me that we don't have the same expectation for doctors, for
Yeah.
police officers, for EMTs, for all of our first responders and people who are on the front lines of those types of situations, because to assume that they have no psychological or emotional burden that comes from that is obviously false. And in the same way that we have, to my mind at least, it's like when you think about police officers in particular, we have regular physical fitness check-ins, right? You have to be able to every so often go in and, run 10 miles or whatever it is. How are we not also having a regular expectation for mental health? And I think it goes back to the fact that in this country, we don't treat mental health as physical health. We don't
Right.
treat it as health. We treat it as like a fluffy, nice to have
Mhm.
for upper class people who get to have therapists, right? And that we don't consider it to be as important in general as physical health. And I think it's crazy.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. We're asking people to carry a huge amount of stuff without giving them the tools to carry it, without telling them this is a safe place to put this down.
Right. And helping them process doing that, et cetera. And I think I'm also reminded that there's so every once in a while you hear an anecdote from somebody about where a doctor came in and cried as they were giving them news. And every time you hear that anecdote, that person is celebrating the doctor.
Yes, absolutely.
And yet it is by far the exception.
Mhm.
I can't imagine being an oncologist and not crying daily. Either with joy of somebody who has, come out the other side, or, you know, from the other end, like you've just told a single mom of 3 kids that she's got breast cancer. If you're not crying after that conversation, I feel like there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
Sociopath is a thing. So, but we're also not, but we've created a system that tells medical professionals that they're not supposed to. That, like you were saying, right? It's supposed to be compartmentalized, put it in the box, put the box in another box, put that in a bigger box, and then hit it with a hammer, and then put what's left in a
Hmm.
closet and hope it never comes out. That's just not a sustainable model at all. And it's insane to me. I really don't understand it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
odd stuff.
So this is all a lot, and you have a lot that you process and sit with on the daily. Are you always this like Zen, deep thinking, deep feeling person? Like, do you eat French fries and watch cartoons as well, Shannon? Or like you have a small human. My small humans are very into French fries and cartoons. Like, how do you lighten up? And what does lightening up look like for you?
How do I lighten up? Well, there's somebody right here. She's doing her job, so she's off camera right now, but she is my service dog, and she
Ah.
helps me out a lot. So while I'm working, she gets very excited when I pull out the light and I pull down the microphone and put on my headphones because I do being quiet. Yes.
Mm.
Um, but if I'm just sitting down here to work, there's a lot of the time that I will get kind of sniffly about something because I'm working through some stuff. And she'll come over and right away she'll put her feet on my lap and she just leans into me and she'll remind me every 20 minutes or so that I need to get up and play with her because that is part of my care package that she offers. So she's a big part of everything that I do. Honestly, she helps. Um, she's kind of like a boost to my nervous system. So she senses in me when I'm not emotionally regulating very well.
Mhm.
And she catches that early, way earlier than I can. And she'll come over and say, "Hey, let's do some stuff."
Hey, mom,
And
you smell funny. Let's go throw a ball. Let's go. Come on,
yeah,
mom. Lick,
yeah.
lick. Yeah.
And this work is this work is never easy. I don't want to say that it's, I mean, hanging out with puppies and kids is great, but it's not ever easy. And she makes it easier because I can do for whatever processing that I'm not able to fit in the car after I've put my camera bag in the seat, she can help me with at home. But also things like being outside and um
Please
gosh,
tell me there are French fries and cartoons at some point in your life, Shannon. No?
ah, I guess I don't really do cartoons, although my young person has turned me on to anime. So, which I never expected that I would like. And I mean, like the She-Ra series on Netflix,
It's so
we
good.
love that. It's I remember just how it felt watching it the first time and how we would stay up late because we wanted to see what was going to happen. And then that feeling when it's coming to an end that it's so good and I want to keep going, but I know that if I watch this next one, then that's going to be the last one. And then I have grief about that, right?
Yep.
And then all the subsequent times that we've watched it have not been the same. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty playful. Honestly, we have a
You had puppy to play with, you have a small human to play with, you have She-Ra to watch. Okay, I'm feeling better now
yeah,
that you have levity as well in your life.
there's stuff. I'm honestly a really goofy person. Um like really goofy person. So there's plenty of that. And there's lots of fart jokes going around at home. And
My children are obsessed with butts and farts. We have so many rules about, like, we do not say butt at the table. And they're like, "Okay, mommy, booty." And I'm like, "Oh my there's only so many iterations, right?" They're like, "Mama, what if I don't say fart, but I just fart?" And like, "Oh my god, stop." My
does it
old
count if you spell it?
They're 3 and 5, so we're not ready to spell yet.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
no, no, no. Yes, if they could spell it, Shannon, I'd be so damn impressed, I'd let them spell it all day. It'd be great. Not even a problem. But
Awesome.
no, we're not there yet. But yes, they are definitely well and truly into farts are the funniest thing in the entire world. And as it turns out, mommy is not a big fan of fart jokes or poop jokes or
Mm,
any of those things, and I just never have been. Like, I don't understand why bodily functions are hilarious, like, they're just bodily functions.
yeah.
I know that I am in the minority, especially within the, young humans, under the age of 15 category, right? Like, I get it, but I do just yeah. And they are also big anime fans. My oldest is a really big fan of Sailor Moon.
I still
He
have not seen that and I need to.
It's on the Netflix.
Okay,
He
I'm checking it
loves
out.
it. He's like, "Mama, Tuxedo Mask got turned evil, but it's gonna be okay, mama." I'm like, "Thanks, buddy.
Oh, that sounds
Appreciate
big
the
and
heads up."
serious.
Yes, yeah. It's just like the right balance of, like, serious and silly. And one of the things I like about the She-Ra, one and, like, a bunch of the other animes is that I think that it was one of the places that was first sort of gender fluid, where you
Hmm.
see a lot of guys with long hair wearing a dress, and that's very normal, in there, and so for, my little boy whose favorite colors are glitter and rainbow, that's like he's like, "These are my people, mom," and I'm like, "You bet, buddy. Rock on. You
That's
and
right.
Sailor Moon." Um, well, I cannot believe it has been, our time is almost up, and it's been almost an hour, so what have I not asked you that I should have done?
I don't know. I thought we were going to talk more about dogs.
I did too. I feel like somehow, and I don't really understand how, we left the dogs out
Because
of all of this.
that's the job I think that people would say, "Hey, I want that job. I want to
I
be a
agree.
pet photographer."
But I
But
feel like we talked about, like, it's the grieving process for both the humans and the
yeah,
dogs. So
yeah,
and the dogs don't write very many checks. So, like, in terms of who's paying you, rarely I would think is it the dog.
correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Although some of them do earn quite a bit of money.
that doesn't even surprise me.
Mhm.
Um, well, thank you so much for your time and your vulnerability and your candor and for letting me talk about me. I appreciate it. I feel like I got like a therapy session as well as a podcast episode. So that's fantastic. We will have all of the links to you, to the puppies, to the humans, to everything in the show notes. And I just so appreciate you. Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Hey, I Want Your Job. For more information on how you can get your own awesome job, visit ONH Consulting at www.onhconsulting.com. We offer incredible resumes, no nonsense career advice, and real world tips for landing a job in today's market. Check us out on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Insta for more insider information. Soon, you'll be hearing us say, I'm Michelle Olivier, and hey, I want your job.